Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Your Path to Leadership, Assessing Leadership Potential and Charting Your Way. Our presenters today are Jeff Burkaw, who is a senior consultant here at CPS HR Consulting, and Karen Evans, the training manager at CPS HR. Before we get started, I want to share some information about the webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode to avoid interruptions to the session. You can still ask questions, and we encourage you to do so using the Q&A panel in your webinar dashboard. We'll make every effort to address your questions at the end of the presentation as time allows. Today's presentation is available on the CPS HR website and as a handout in your webinar dashboard. We'll also forward a link to all of today's attendees when the recording is available for viewing. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Jeff and Karen.
All right, thanks. Well, I am Jeff, and this is Karen.
Hello, everyone.
There we go. Thanks for joining us. I don't know if you were with us last week, but we had some technical difficulties. If you're back giving us another shot, we really appreciate it. We apologize for that. I think Karen and I have been chomping at the bit to do this since last week because we're really excited about this. This is just a brief agenda of what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about leadership potential and measuring leadership potential. We did a webinar last fall. I don't know if you joined us for that, but we talked a little bit about leadership potential and a tool that we're developing to assess leadership potential. So not leadership itself, but actually potential, to see if people have, they are going to have likely to have success in a future leadership role. We talked a little bit about the development of that tool, so I want to cover that again, and then I'm going to talk about how we've actually put it to use. We've actually done a pilot study, and so we found some really interesting things. So I am going to review those 7 leadership potential competencies, and then talk about our potential assessment, and then a little bit about what we found out in our pilot study. And then I'm going to turn it over to Karen. She's going to talk about how our potential leadership potential assessment then can help you chart your pathway to leadership with an action learning guide about how to get started on your own learning process, about our curated library of resources, and developing an individualized learning plan. And then she'll talk about some of the results from our pilot study, the phase 2 of the pilot study, which is that path to leadership. All right, so jumping right in here, what is leadership potential? So again, we're not talking about leadership itself, but we're talking about the potential. So it's the capacity for someone to be successful in a future leadership role, given some time, a certain amount of time, and a certain amount of development. So we're not talking about, are people good leaders today, or are they, should they be next in line for some sort of leadership position? But this is, down the road. Are they on the right path, basically? Measuring leadership potential, really, it's a couple different things. First of all, motivation is really important. Someone has to be motivated to be in a leadership role, or all the development in the world isn't going to be helpful. Motivation looks different based on the individual, looks different in different organizations, but generally it's, does a person have the willingness to take on extra duties and responsibilities, kind of go above and beyond, making sacrifices for the benefit of the organization. So not just oneself, but for the organization, and willingness to embrace a certain amount of psychological discomfort. So are they willing to, that go above and beyond, sacrifice themselves to a certain extent for the benefit, again, of the organization and not just oneself. Again, motivation looks different based on the individual. It looks different in different organizations. There are lots of different ways to measure that. You can, certainly it's good to interview people. It's good to look at job performance, especially in lower leadership roles, like if they're first-line supervisors, look at their job performance as a supervisor. There are a lot of different things to look at. But one thing that is really clear from all the research that we've done is that having leadership potential really means that they are these people are exhibiting a certain amount of leadership competencies, so specific core leadership competencies right now. So they're not in a leadership role, but they're already possessing some of these core leadership competencies, and we've identified 7 of these competencies. Now again, these aren't leadership competencies necessarily. They do translate to leadership, obviously, but these are leadership potential competencies. So again, people need to be demonstrating some of these competencies right now to show that they do have potential to be a leader in the future. So I'll just go through these kind of briefly. Now, each one of these, we've got these defined by a series of behavioral indicators, as we call them. So certain on-the-job behaviors that show that people have these competencies. So the first one is accountability. So demonstrating integrity and trustworthiness. Do they fulfill promises and commitments to others? Setting clear expectations for themselves and for others, and defining those expectations so that people understand their roles and responsibilities. Learning orientation, demonstrating curiosity and innovation and insight. Do they consider creative approaches and novel solutions to problems? And do they take calculated risks to incorporate innovative and creative ideas to improve organizational performance? Do they support developmental opportunities, training and mentoring and knowledge transfer for others? So it's helping others to learn as well. The next one is perseverance. So as you might imagine, it's persistence and adaptability, flexibility, not letting obstacles kind of throw you off course. Do you adapt to changes in requirements and demands that may impact pre-established courses of action? Do you treat obstacles and setbacks as opportunities for learning and growth? And vision and strategic action. So supporting, promoting, and ensuring alignment with the organization's vision and values, understanding how an organization must change based on external trends and influences, adapting to organizational requirements and demands, and assisting others in identifying future consequences and potential impacts of the organization. So this strategic action, it's not just oneself. All of these competencies have an element of helping others. So helping others see how their actions, kind of play into the role of the organization and that sort of thing. The next one is inspires. So very, very important for a leadership role. Energizing others, creating a sense of direction and purpose and excitement, engagement, momentum, providing recognition to others to reinforce effective performance, modeling excellence, influencing others to commit to getting the job done regardless of the task at hand. Remember, they say, managers get people to do things, but leaders get people to want to do things. So it's really inspiring people to get the job done. And the sixth one is fosters collaboration. So developing and maintaining and strengthening relationships, working together to achieve results. But it's not just about getting along with others, but it's also about helping others get along with others. So creating an environment that promotes teamwork and respect, listening to others and reacting in a non-judgmental manner, encouraging individuals to share their issues and concerns. And finally, the seventh is facilitates understanding. So this is communication, as you can imagine, very important, communicating clearly with others, but it's also encouraging an environment where others are free to express their thoughts and opinions. Demonstrating interpersonal sensitivity and sympathy when speaking to others about sensitive issues, active listening, all of that good communication kind of stuff. So those are there very, very briefly. Those are the 7 core leadership potential competencies. And you probably recognize those as being, if you've seen leadership competencies in general, you probably recognize those. They're pretty basic. But based on a lot of research that we have done, these are sort of the basic ones that people really need to be demonstrating some right now in order to show that they've got potential in the future, again, given a certain amount of time and individual development. So in just a minute here, I'm going to tell you about how we go about assessing these 7 core potential competencies. But right now, we want to ask a little question. We want to ask, this is just an open-ended question, how does your agency identify leadership potential? So are you, and you can say, no, we're not doing it, but if you are, how do you? And it's just an open-ended question, and you can just type that in.
Type it right into the Q&A panel, please, and we'll start. So
we'll wait just a minute and see what you folks come up with.
Okay, so what sort of answers have you heard so far with some of the people we've talked with? Here we go. Okay, we've got not sure. Someone else says supervisor recommendation through evaluations. We don't have any formal or organized process. Steps up for projects or extra activities. We don't really do it. No particular pattern. At one time we had potential leaders attend a countywide leadership session, takes on leadership projects. We do ride-alongs with staff to observe how they work. None that I'm aware of. It seems like it's about half and half between none and...
None and doing some things. And it sounds like what is being done, it's a lot of looking at current job performance and how people react on the job, and have they stepped up to do those kind of above and beyond things, you know, these extra contributions. And those are really great. Now, a lot of those, though, are really getting at motivation, like when they step up and take on extra, you know, extra duties and responsibilities. A lot of that does show, is showing motivation, and that's really, really important. But we would argue that you do have to be demonstrating some of these core leadership competencies as well. Here's how we do it. It's a 360-degree survey. Now, if you're familiar with 360-degree surveys, or if you're not, basically it's a survey that goes out to everybody all around the individual being rated. So that means supervisors, peers, subordinates, so everybody, you know, at the levels, you know, above, below, and I guess next to the individual. They all fill out a survey where they rate the individual according to how often they demonstrate individual behaviors that define the competencies. There are, actually originally when we developed the tool, there were 5 to 7 behavioral indicators or on-the-job behaviors for each competency. We've actually increased that a little bit. There are up to 9 in some of the competencies. We increased that to get a little bit more data. So again, basically, they're just asked, how often does he or she demonstrate this particular behavior? And then there's a rating scale, almost never, sometimes, about half the time, most of the time, and almost always. This is what it looks like. This is what one page or one competency looks like on our assessment. So this is for perseverance. We've got a little bit of, you know, the definition of what we mean by perseverance, and then you can see those individual behaviors under perseverance: remains focused in the face of setbacks and obstacles, adapts to changes in organizational requirements, etc. And so the raters can just go through, read each one of these behaviors, and then rate it on the rating scale, and then go on to the next one. So this is one of the competencies, and then obviously there are 7. So when you get the results, one thing you can do with that is you can use the results to see who has potential and then who should maybe be selected for participation in a leadership development program or succession planning program. If you look at the box over on the right, you can see that, you know, we come up with a competency score. So we average the ratings for all of the behaviors within a competency and then come up with an overall score for the competency. And then we can average those and come up with an overall leadership potential score. So you can see in this example that this person is at 3.96, so average, you know, potential score. And you can use that to help you select people to go into some kind of a program. Now, I would recommend if you do this, you also add in that motivational element. You know, look at people's scores, but also do some interviews, look at their organizational contributions, job performance, and all of that. But you can also use this assessment as a tool for individuals to identify their strengths and their areas for opportunity. So when they get the results, it looks like this. So here, again, this is for perseverance. You can see the behaviors now under each one of those behaviors under perseverance, and then you can see the ratings. So you can see their self-ratings if they choose to do, just rate themselves on the competencies. And then you can see others, the others ratings, and then there's a gap rating. So it shows the differences between the self-ratings and the other ratings. So if it's, negative or positive, meaning some people rate themselves higher in certain behaviors than other people rate them, and maybe that shows that they're not actually demonstrating that behavior as much as they think they are. Or what we see a lot of times is people will rate themselves lower on a particular behavior than others do, and so actually maybe they're doing a little better in that area than they thought. I think the most important thing, though, is we can look for what we call areas of opportunity. So in this example, you can see the relatively lower behaviors. So like remains focused in the face of setbacks and obstacles at 3.5, so relatively lower than the others. That might be an area for opportunity. So now let me go on to the pilot study. So that's basically how our assessment works. So we did a pilot study. So we found a medium-sized city, I guess you could say, a city of about 300,000, and we found 18 participants. So these were folks in management across the city, in city government, different agencies. So only 18 participants, but we had 100 different raters. So what we did is we had the participants pick choose a group of raters. So they would pick co-workers or team members, direct reports if they had them, their supervisors or managers who weren't their direct supervisor or manager, and then other people with whom they have regular contact. So people that they don't work with all the time necessarily, or they're not in their same department or work unit, but they have good knowledge of their work behaviors. So the range was 2 to 11. So 2 meaning one person only had two raters, so not great data, but one person had 11, so that's really good. The average was sort of 5 to 6 raters per participant, so that's fairly good. We recommend, when possible, at least 3 in each category. So 3 peers, 3 supervisors, managers, even if they're not direct supervisors, 3 direct reports if possible. One thing that's really interesting about this, remember we only had 18 participants, but we had 30 people who were listed as direct supervisors. So I don't know if that indicates that some people are reporting to multiple supervisors. I suppose that's possible. So here's what we found out. So here are the overall results for the competencies, kind of overall averages. I put that rating scale over there on the left, just so without that it's kind of meaningless. So if you look at the competencies, look at the ratings, the average ratings, 4.6, 4.4, 4.5, really high. So remember, this means if you look at the rating scale, 4.6, that's halfway between most of the time, so they're exhibiting that behavior most of the time, and almost always. So that's really, really high. So why so high? We would like to see lots of variability in the scores. So what happens when we get a group of people who are already really high in a criterion variable? Well, we get range restriction. So that's what we have here. We've got people who are, they were in upper level management positions, some in executive positions. So they're already really high in all of these competencies. So we don't see a whole lot of variability. Like 5, and then range up to 5.0. So even though the average ratings were all very high, there's a certain certain range there, and of course that it's all relative. So even if somebody is, say, all 5s in one area, if they have one area where they're maybe 4.5, still high, but that shows that there's always room to grow, and it's always good for people to know what they're doing right, what are their strengths. We also looked at the competency ratings by rater type just to see if there were a lot of differences or any differences. There really weren't big differences by the rater type. You can look at peers. It looks like peers, people rated a little bit higher. Peers generally are a little more favorable than managers and subordinates, but not by much. You can see there's not huge differences there. So now I'm going to turn it over to Karen, and she's going to talk about how we take the results from this and turn it into the path, one's path to leadership.
Thank you, Jeff. So everyone, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about sort of the second part of the pilot study and where you go from here once you have your results. So in this particular pilot, the city is looking at integrating the assessment tool into their overall training program and into succession planning. And they're seeing this as a really important part of their planning to create a very comprehensive and systematic, objective way to identify individuals with potential for leadership roles and potentially as a tool for determining who is selected for a particular type of program. So they're looking at what do we do with the results, and then once we get those results, how do we take action with individuals on them, and so hence the action learning report and the guide. So as Jeff discussed, the initial part of the pilot was the assessment tool itself with the competencies comprised of the behaviors. And the second part is this action learning guide that gives you a framework for taking action on your specific results or your specific, your top and your lowest rated behaviors. So you get your report. So what do you do with it? It's going to tell you what your top rated strengths are, so building on those strengths, but it's also going to give you where your areas of opportunity are to develop your 5 lowest. And again, in this particular pilot, Jeff mentioned that it was a fairly high level group, and so, you know, opportunity is relative. Everybody scored quite high on most of the competencies, but there's always area for opportunity. So the guide will summarize your top 5 and your top low and give you that framework. So the idea of the guide is that no one is ever going to pay as close attention to your growth as you will. You know, you're focused on your growth and your development and your success in your career, and it really lies in your hands. You know, you'll work with people throughout your career, but ultimately it's in your hands. And so the guide, as we've talked about it, is how can you get started charting your path. So let's take a quick poll question as we get started. Do you have to be a manager or a supervisor to be a leader? Glenn, did you hear you?
No, the poll is launched and we are ready to receive responses. Well, I'm seeing a clear leader on this.
Oh, what do you guys think?
I'm seeing a really clear leader on this. So since there are so few choices, we'll just give this a few more seconds for folks to finish getting their responses in. And okay, looks like everybody has voted. So we'll go ahead and close that up and share the results.
What are our results?
Said no, you do not need to be a manager or supervisor to be a leader.
Excellent.
We agree.
Good answer. We agree 100%. So the behavior, you know, it's behaviors that are associated, that we associate with leadership, right? We look to leaders to exhibit certain behaviors because of the role, but it's not the role, it's the behavior, and the behaviors are individual, and we expect leaders to bring us together around ideas, to find areas of commonality and common interest, to listen, to collaborate, to inspire us, to keep going and persevere. They, you know, resilience through obstacles, and those are all behaviors. So let's look at some results. These are results from one individual in the pilot, and these are the top 5 rated behaviors, and they're broken down by the specific competency and then the behavior that was rated. And so in this case, we have the ratings from their colleagues, their peers, their manager, and then their own rating. And you can see in this example that they rated themselves pretty closely to how others rated them, but then in a couple of areas around inspires, they rated themselves a little bit lower. And so there's food for thought there as you reflect on how your self-rating and your peers and colleagues and manager rating. And then if we look at the lowest rated behaviors, again, these are all relative. We can see there are some gaps here though in terms of the rating from others and our self-rating. And again, we would look at how am I thinking about myself? How are my colleagues and peers, and how's my manager rating me, and what do I do with that when I get ready to take action? And the assessment can be used in a multiple of ways. It can be used individually for me in an individualized development plan. Again, it might be a tool that a department or an agency adopts for succession planning or selection into a program, and then the areas for building on your strengths or working on those areas of opportunity might become part of what you focus on in the leadership development program. So there are a lot of different ways that the assessment can be used, and the results can be used with the guide. And so getting started, we're charting our path. We're going to set some goals, and we'll look at this in just a minute. We'll look at an example. Becoming a better learner, you're going to gain new skills to enhance what you're doing great already. Let's build on that, and maybe build on that as a bridge to some of the areas that you want to work on. And then the other thing that's important about this is that you can't focus on everything. And so the guide is really designed to help you focus on one thing at a time for a limited period of time as you work on it with a mentor or a coach or in a program with your manager. Again, lots of different ways that you can use the tool and the results. We'll structure a specific plan with recommendations from a curated library of resources that CPS has pulled together, and that those resources are specifically aligned to your individual results, and so aligned to your specific strengths and your specific areas to work on. So this is an example of a curated library. And these are results that have been pulled from the library, are part of, this is a sample plan. And these learning recommendations are built around areas of strength. So inspires, taking strategic action, facilitating understanding. And it's just, you can see it's a broad range of resources because people learn in different ways. They like to find information in different ways. They like to take in information in different ways. And so these are designed to sort of get you started and get you thinking, and it might lead you down, a bunny trail for more information about a particular thing. But you see we have articles, there are video, there are recommended books to tap into. We might have a training class or two, TED Talks, there are podcasts included, tools and templates for different, depending on the type of behavior or the competency. So it's a well-rounded library that's been curated by, I'm going to call them experts in the field who have been in senior leadership roles and in HR talent development roles for many, many years. So this is your plan. This is what an individualized action learning plan would look like. You would identify your long-term goal, your immediate goal, and then focus on 2 different areas to focus on. One strength and one area of opportunity. Now we haven't fleshed out the timeline here, but the idea is that here's the behavior I'm working on, and here are the activities that I am going to engage in and participate in. I'm going to apply and I'm going to practice. Again, I can be working with a mentor or a coach. I might be working with my manager because it might be part of my professional plan for the year individually, or it might be part of what I'm going to work on when I'm in the leadership development program. So many different ways to think about how this can be used. And then, of course, we want to track our progress, and we need an accountability partner for tracking progress. And that accountability partner might be your coach, might be your manager, might be someone who is in a program with you, might be a colleague that knows, you've said to me, will you help me and be my accountability partner? But here, we want a tracking form. We want to say, when are we going to get started? What are we going to do this month? What were my aha moments? So it's this idea of when you write something down and you reflect on it, that's where you're really going to take in and make use of what that activity was. So the pilot study is phase 2 of the pilot with the city is going on right now. They are they have asked individuals to self-assess, and guides have been developed for each one of the participants. And then all those individuals will be working with a partner, some kind of accountability partner, a coach, a peer, a mentor, could be, their next manager up. But then there'll be a clear follow-up with them in 3 to 6 months on what has been the value, how are you progressing, all those things that we want to look at as we implement a pilot. But there's a real, it's a structured process for them to take both the results and the guide and implement with this pilot study. And with that, I think we can take some questions.
Okay, we do have some questions so far, and everybody please feel free to forward any other questions you have. Keep them coming. So let's see, first question that came in was, how to develop leadership skills and opportunities when your agency has a flat management structure and limited potential opportunity?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things here, and Jeff chime in. But one thing is to volunteer to take on projects. Raise your hand. What else can I get involved with? Is there, do we have a gap somewhere where I can help out? I'd like to learn some new things. It's harder in a smaller organization because there is limited sort of career trajectory up the ladder, but there are always opportunities to take on projects and learn new things. And so it goes back to that learning orientation and that willingness to sort of jump in and learn a new area. And I would say the other thing is, if you don't have that opportunity, there are always volunteer organizations that you might be able to work with and work on some of the behaviors as well, or the competencies.
Yeah, and professional organizations too, and I don't know if you mentioned that, but there are always lots of professional organizations who need good leadership, and there are lots of things to do. And also, I would suggest too, even if it doesn't look like your organization has opportunities, because they're not formal opportunities, you might be able to create opportunities. If you present ideas to management, they might be open to that, especially, you're coming to them saying that you're willing to put in all this extra effort to go above and beyond. It's hard for them to say no, I would suggest.
Right.
Okay.
What else, Julie?
Okay. What is something that is commonly overlooked when someone is developing their professional leadership skills?
Well, first of all, you want to make sure you're developing all of your skills, so it's good to know where all of your opportunities for development are. But, I would say even before you start that, I would say that, the most important thing to even get started is to make sure you're motivated. You've got to have the motivation. You have to have the drive. You have to really want to be in a leadership role. I have known, we probably have all known, people who have, worked hard to get up into management and upper management positions, probably because they've been at an organization for a long time, and they've done well in their job, and they just kind of want to work up the ladder and, get the best possible position, at the organization, but they don't necessarily want to be a leader or be in the leader role. Because being a leader is, obviously it's more than being a manager, much more. You are really responsible for people. You're accountable for people and for their motivation and their well-being. And so I would say that's probably the most overlooked thing, is the actual desire to be in a leadership role in the first place.
And I would add, just from the perspective of the leadership potential competencies, kind of two areas that don't get as much attention as you might expect are vision and strategic action. A lot of times we're so focused on the day-to-day and the tactical that vision, that future thinking, that strategy for what is my area going to look like in 5 years, or how is the changing workforce impacting me, or what are the implications of technology for the jobs that we do. So that forward thinking sometimes is, until you get to a very high level, you don't have as much opportunity. And I think the other thing, and Jeff mentioned this, but it's oftentimes overlooked in terms of formal development, is sort of the people part and the empathy and, really trying to understand individuals from where they're coming from. It's very easy to just kind of, go along and do a great job with your job, but it's the people part that we really need to work on sometimes.
Yeah, and so, like in the, communication, I mean, pretty much every competency model has some kind of communication competencies, but we feel that, we call it facilitates understanding. So it's more than just making sure people understand you, but it's creating an environment where everyone is heard. Everybody is, they want to communicate and want to listen to everybody else. And then in this, Karen, you were just talking about the vision, strategic action. An element of that is not just understanding how your actions, tie into the, the goals and mission of the organization, but helping others to see how their work fits in with the mission of the organization. So very important.
Good point.
Okay, so here's one asking, what are the best ways to identify leadership skills used in everyday life? So I think outside of the workplace.
I think what's great about these core leadership potential competencies is we do see them pretty much. We see them in all areas of life, or we can. I mean, accountability. I mean, we all need to be accountable for our actions and, communicate our expectations, for ourselves to others and of others. Learning orientation. It's important that we just learn from our experiences and apply our learning to new situations. Of course, perseverance, obviously, really important. Some things, like vision, strategic action, not so much, because that's really about the organization. But understanding and collaborating with others, these are all just basic, great life skills. You contrast that with kind of your standard leadership competencies. For example, CPS HR, we've got a leadership 360 assessment that's got 13 core and a total of 25 separate leadership competencies, and those get more into the they're almost a little bit more managerial. I mean, things like technical competence and meeting and facilitation skills and promoting diversity and managing resources, technology management, that kind of stuff. So again, a little bit more managerial, and whereas these leadership potential competencies, the 7 we're talking about, are real pure leadership. We're not really talking about managing resources and technical competence and that sort of thing. Obviously, those are going to be really important in a leadership role, but these 7 core, I think, really do pretty much apply to most aspects of life.
Okay. Let's see, we've got some more questions. How can the assessment be used for an individual?
Yeah, well, I think that's the beauty of it, right? It is individualized. It can be something that you use for yourself and self-assess, even if it's not adopted by your department or your agency. Could be something that you do your own self-assessment on, and you get an idea of kind of where you fall in the different areas. But it's, ideally it's designed so that it's part of a departmental or an agency or a city or a community's plan, and then it becomes part of your individualized plan that you can work on with your individualized results.
And I would say too that based on our research, these 7 potential competencies, and we've selected these because they are, we would argue, applicable across probably any public agency and probably most private organizations as well. So you develop these in your particular organization, you go somewhere else. You can go anywhere. Yeah. We're not suggesting you leave your job, but we're saying these will help you anywhere.
Okay, terrific. Here's another one that came in. Does the competency assessment also look at strengths and transferable skills?
Well, it does. It definitely looks at strengths. I mean, it looks at strengths and the areas for opportunity. So that's, and I think Karen probably touched on this, it's good for people to know what they're doing well, what their strengths are, their superpowers, we sometimes call them, so they can kind of keep up the good work. The second part?
Transferable skills. Well, those are the behaviors, right? So the behaviors that you're exhibiting, there's a whole set of skills that go along with facilitating understanding or creating a culture of collaboration or trust within a team so that everybody's voice is heard. So the behavior leads to a set of skills that can transfer, as Jeff said, anywhere.
Yeah, anywhere in any situation. I mean, perseverance, treating obstacles and setbacks as an opportunity for growth. I mean, boy, that's a great thing to have in all parts of life. So.
I remember years ago, Jeff, a woman worked for me, and she said, "I have never failed at anything." I thought, wow, what an interesting comment. But it was all about how she thought about failure. It wasn't a failure, it was a learning opportunity. And so she really thought about it as, what am I taking away from this that's going to help me the next time? Which I thought was fascinating.
That is, yeah.
Yeah.
You're thinking, first you're thinking, wow, total narcissist. And then, wait, no, she's brilliant.
Right.
She's so right.
She's brilliant, right? Exactly. Yeah.
That's an excellent perspective. Okay, so here is one asking, how many samples do you need to have before you can comfortably say it's a valid measure or reliable measure?
Yeah, we recommend at least 3 raters in each area. So that means, 3 peers or coworkers, 3 supervisors, managers. Obviously, they're not all going to be your direct supervisor, but people at that level. 3 subordinates if you have them. If you don't, then maybe 3 people in other parts of the organization who are familiar with your work. That's kind of at a minimum. Like any kind of study, really, the more data, the better. So if you had 100 different raters, obviously that would be better data. It's hard to say what reliability would look like, in a measure like this. I would just say the more the better. The more raters, the more confidence you can have in the ratings. And then, of course, you can look at, say, standard deviation. I didn't mention that looking at the results. We looked at the standard deviation of the results, and very low. So there was a lot of agreement across the raters. It would be really interesting if someone had, say, 20 raters, and then we could look at the standard deviation, and if we saw that it was very, very low, we could have a lot of confidence. But again, you know, the more the better, and it just benefits people to have more and more raters, because it's just, you know, one person only sees certain aspects of a person, another person sees, you know, certain aspects or certain behaviors. So again, if you can get more people who have seen that person act in different situations, it's just better.
Okay, terrific. And here is another question we received. In a leadership role, such as a supervisor, how do you set the tone for your team expectations without coming off as too aggressive?
I think that goes into the inspires. I mean, are you inspiring people? Like I mentioned, you know, before, I've always heard that, you know, the old adage is, you know, managers get people to do things, leaders get people to want to do things. So that's what we're after when we're talking about inspires. I mean, are they influencing people to want to get the job done regardless of the task at hand and that sort of thing? And yeah, that is a leader who can do that. And that's something that someone would really have to work at. I've worked for really, really great managers who can get people to do things, and they can really get the job done, and everybody gets the job done, but they're not leaders necessarily. So what you're talking about is pure leadership.
Mm-hmm. And I think also tying into, goes hand in hand, is the kind of the vision, tying into what's the bigger picture? How does it tie in to the goals of the company, or the mission and vision for the company, or the core values of the company, along with that inspiration? How does what your department is doing, and what individuals, what is their contribution that leads up into the organization overall?
That's really, yeah, that's really interesting. And that's goes back to the old concept they call task identity, which is understanding how one little job task contributes to some sort of overall goal. So it's really important for people to understand how their job and their role and their responsibilities, however small they may see it, they need to understand that it does contribute to kind of the bigger picture of the organization. And that is, for most people, that's inspiring. That is motivating.
Yep.
Okay, terrific. Well, that wraps up all the questions that we had today. So I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Karen and Jeff, for an excellent presentation. I want to remind everyone that we will send a follow-up email that will have a link to today's recording. So thank you, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.